Hi, everyone. I'm Carmel Kemp, and this is Creating Life Consciously. We have an amazing guest today, and I am super excited to dive into this conversation. Melissa Kim Corter is a best-selling author, mentor, speaker, and teacher, and is pursuing a Ph.D. in depth psychology and Jungian archetypal studies and a focus on ecopsychology. Melissa believes in tending to the soror mystica, the inner feminine alchemist. This is the sacred pull, calling us to discover a deeper purpose and weave our authentic message into the tapestry of the world. Melissa is a highly sought-after teacher and mentor. Her accomplishments include guiding thousands during events with presenters such as Elizabeth Gilbert, Denise Linn, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Gregg Braden, Myss, and Martha Beck. She has been a guest on countless podcasts and a contributor to numerous articles. Her best-selling books include Nudges from Your Spirit, the Wild Woman series, and 9 anthology books. In her home studio, Melissa loves creating wooden mandalas and curating sacred gifts that foster the re-enchantment of daily life. When she isn't traveling or hosting retreats, Melissa is exploring the wooded and magical forests of upstate New York with her husband, teenage son, and their precious fur baby, Bella. Whoa, okay. So it would seem like you're creating quite a bit, Melissa. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I am super thrilled and absolutely grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And just let's play. Let's be Shakti. Let's be the divine feminine today, and explore all that we can in creating consciousness and consciously. Yeah.
I love it. What an honor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm just excited to see where this goes, where we just wonder and wander in conversation, and it's truly an honor to be with you today. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Same here. So, that's quite I don't want to call it a resume, but it's life experience, right? It's that pull, that call, that weaving that a lot of us get messages to act on something, to have an idea, to imagine something, and then to really have the courage to create it. And that's the tricky part sometimes. So, why don't we just start by letting everybody know, what is Melissa? What has been your navigation that brought you along on this journey? And we can dive in from there.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'll just start by being very transparent and saying I wish it was willfully, but so much of my journey was quite a push, a shove, I would say, in this direction of seeking. And, it's funny because when I hear people read my bio, I laugh a little bit because there's a part of me that's like, man, the beginning of all of those things came from pain. Came from seeking, from feeling broken, from not feeling good enough. So that list grew out of me searching for wholeness, trying to connect with something greater than myself, all the while shutting down to those little voices, to the nudges, to that inner calling or pull, that many of us experience. And so it wasn't until recent years, decades of seeking, that I finally started to surrender and say, maybe I should listen to this voice. Maybe it might know better than my ego self or my humanness wants to know, or try to figure out this thing we call life. And so there was quite a bit of struggle along that, which I know we all, a lot of us relate to that and end up in these circles of like-minded people from our journeys, our individual journeys. So that's a little bit about what kind of got me to today. And then I'm still just uncovering who I am and what I'm all about. And I was joking around actually this morning with my husband about this because I've been working on this website, just to give an example. And I haven't launched it because every time I change, every time I go to push that submit, I'm like, this isn't me anymore. Why am I even working on this thing? Every other week, I feel like I'm kind of shape shifting into someone else. And it's hard to track that. It's hard to stay present to that. But today I can say that whatever unfolds, the work that I'm doing is really about a discovery of self, just unfolding, unveiling, trying to find our footing in this messy world. And in between all of that, just looking for that enchantment that I fully believe exists. And nature is one of the ways it's revealed to us. So that's sort of my my anchor these days, is really holding on to that.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's we were talking about this before we pushed the record button, that it's messy work. Surrendering isn't it's not easy. The false self, ego, whatever we want to call it, is when it's rooted in 3D consciousness, which is duality. It's dualistic. 3D consciousness is dualistic. It's fear-based, it's rule-based, it's survival-based. And when we come only from a place of that 3D consciousness, that's where we get kind of pulled down. But it is possible to access higher dimensions of consciousness. And when we can operate this human organism from that higher dimension of consciousness, there's so much more magic that can happen. You can bend time, right? Time is only linear in 3D. It's not linear in higher dimensions. I mean, I've done it. I know other people that have done it. And then sometimes, the fear pops in, and I'm not good enough, or who the hell am I doing a podcast, for heaven's sakes, right? I mean, but then if I kept that attitude all the way along, I'm not here. I'm not doing this work. I wouldn't have found myself in the jungle in the Amazon here in Peru drinking ayahuasca 9 years ago, and then training to become a shaman to administer and hold ceremony for people in that space. I mean, who, me? And I resisted for 9 months. The medicine and the guidance was like, you're going to do this. I'm like, no, not me, who, me? No, forget it. Not going to do it. So I get it. That's surrender and listening to those little voices, right?
Yeah, resistance. Oh man, that resistance is a bitch. Excuse my language, but oh my gosh, it's interesting how sneaky it is, how tricky it is. The voice of resistance. I know it's a little different likely for all of us, but speaking just personally, there's these moments where, I feel like a lot of us have these different dreams in our hearts of what we want to do. Like you, it's like, I'm going to Peru. I'm going to do this podcast, all these different dreams and aspirations, and that little voice that pops up. And it's so interesting what happens when that starts to get a hold of us, and how we can grapple with that. And what is our identity? Can I do this? And I've just found myself lately realizing that the bigger that voice is, the more intense that resistance is, the closer I actually am to something really freaking good. And there's something that wants to stop me. And it might just be another part of myself, right? It might be something other than that. But that's when I'm choosing to kind of surrender to is, you know what? This fear is getting bigger. Good. I'm getting closer. The resistance is more powerful. Okay, I'm on it. And that is slippery and messy, but I am extremely grateful because at the same time, it's showing us all those little magical elements of enchantment. And it's what you were talking about. It's not easy. It's not a journey for the faint-hearted, that's for sure, because it's hidden in plain sight in a really tricky way. It's just that we have all these different illusions, perceptions, right? The way that we see the world. And what I'm discovering is when I lean into that resistance, even though it's really uncomfortable and sometimes actually almost like in a somatic way, painful, at the same time, I'm met with some other component that is equal in enchantment. And I feel like the trick is having a foot in both, right? Can we be with this human tension, resistance, pain, whatever it might be, and can we recognize there's this whole other element that's really rooted in us to succeed, to move through that, to navigate through that channel. And so it's sort of this dance of, well, I'll say more of a thrashing about between those two that I find myself navigating, especially this past year, I would say, most certainly.
For sure. It's interesting that you say that, because I used to, when that fear comes up and sort of having that your foot in both places, is that I would tell myself, just lean into the pointy end of the stick.
I love that.
Right? Just be willing to lean into it. And it might prick, and it might feel like it hurts a little bit in the beginning, but the more you lean into it, it's almost like you develop a capacity to hold it, right? It's to accept everything, because, again, going back to that fear, doubt, unworthiness, oh God, and that's the lens of the perception of the identity that we've created and built up until that point. And, there was a lot of unworthiness in my, until about 10 years ago, so about 50 years of it. And that's what it's like, but wait a minute, it actually doesn't really hurt, right? It's getting past that fear and the attachment to the identity of who you were once, right? I mean, we're constantly shifting and changing. And for me, one of the biggest issues is that this personality and identity that we've created and that has changed over so much time, but when we're in a certain moment of that identity, we think that this is who I am. This is how I talk. This is how I behave. And it's so limiting. It's so incredibly limiting. I don't know if have you ever heard of Sadhguru?
Yes.
Okay. So I was initiated by him 5 years ago. So in addition to my shamanic practice and my mentoring work, I have also been initiated by an enlightened being, master, and I have spent time with him, and he's like real deal. On the planet today, Buddha, Jesus, Babaji, Yogananda, that guy. And what he would say is that the identity that we've created is so limited because we're seeking freedom, but when we keep on putting ourselves into boxes, I'm this, I act this way, I think this way, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm this, I'm that, and the other thing. And the problem is that we've created that personality and persona. Really, I mean, when you take a look at acting, actors take on different personas and different. The problem with most human beings is that we've created a personality and we've taken that mask and we've stuck it onto our face, and we try to rip it off, and we're like, oh no, I don't do that. I don't talk like that. I don't behave like that. And it's so limiting. If we can just sort of look at it that truthfully, we are the cosmos. Empty space, consciousness is gravity defying. And as that, I can be anything I want in any given moment, not limited to the thing that I think that I am.
Absolutely.
And that's not easy either.
I absolutely. I really feel like what you're speaking to is also those opportunities where that fear shows up, or that doubt, or these different things we're talking about. And I really think that in a lot of circumstances, that is that moment where something is saying, you don't need this mask. But then there's a part of us maybe fighting to hold it up, to keep it there. And I think that's part of that tension or that resistance that we can experience when we're trying to answer these big questions of like, who am I, beyond my role, my responsibility, my title, like you mentioned, or gender or whatever it might be. These different experiences are something to be proud of and have appreciation and gratitude and respect towards and for, but yet not fixated within. And that's something I love so much about the work that we do in like depth psychology, as we look at from like an archetypal perspective or through an archetypal lens, which is still different than a lot of things you'll see out there about archetypes, where it's a very fixed structure. This is more of working with the collective unconscious to allow different energy to rise and fall within us. And so it helps us to recognize like, oh, this is the mask that I'm portraying or living or seeing through right now. And yet there's about 50 others right behind this one that I can also work with or experience if I can just let that one go. And we had a great dialogue recently in class about this same topic, and something that came up that I thought is really, really beautiful and I've been kind of holding on to in my mind lately is the idea of building up the ego. And so instead of getting rid of it or trying to get rid of this part of us or even sometimes shaming ourselves for how we show up or certain mask we might identify with, we can learn to build the ego up so it doesn't have to sabotage our efforts when we're saying, I want to try a different one on. I want to see what it's like to encounter myself in a different way, to allow a different part of me to show up that maybe feels more in alignment for who I've grown into. And so if we can build up the ego to, and you mentioned this, to hold more contrast, then it will, it's not that we don't still get triggered or activated by things, but yet there's sort of this idea of resiliency happening and building and forming. It's like you mentioned, feeling that the spear, right? That tension that builds the thoughts in the mind. And the longer we can hold ourselves in that energy, in that space of knowing and trusting, we actually build the ego up so it doesn't have to try to keep us safe by causing us to shrink back immediately at the first sign of tension or pain or conflict or even opposing thoughts. You know, we were talking about this a little before we started, like being able to have conversations that we don't always have to agree on things. And how can we hold ourselves in that energy of witnessing, observing, still honoring someone if it differs from us? And I feel like those allude to some of those masks that we might not even recognize that we're wearing, or that have even been handed to us to wear, which is a whole other interesting thing.
Absolutely. You know, there's so much in that to really take a look at. You know, when we get into, you know, the archetypes, and you probably know this better than I do, but I can only try to speak from my experience, and that's all I ever really tried to do, is that, you know, the archetypes are like the different qualities, right? And tendencies. You know, we can tend to go this way, which then could be, okay, there's qualities and tendencies here that then we adopt and become habitual.
Yes.
Right? And so, you know, we can talk about astrology, which is tendency, but it doesn't have to define us.
Exactly.
Right? You know, I mean, I've encountered several people, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's not good, it's not bad, saying, well, I'm a Libra, I'm just this way. I'm like, well, no, it doesn't have to be that way, right? To become aware of our tendencies and then ask ourselves, is this actually serving or is it a detriment? Because we can change those. I mean, I've absolutely changed. I'm a Libra Scorpio, and I'd be mostly a typical Libra before. I could never make a decision because I wanted harmony and balance. I didn't want confrontation. So it would be like, if somebody asked me, what do you want to do? I'd be like, well, I don't know. What do you want to do? Right? Or do you want to go do this? Sure, it's fine. And I would never really speak up. Like, there would be this little voice inside be like, no, I don't really feel like doing that. But you know what? I just, I don't want to put on my big girl pants and say no. And now I have absolutely no problem. I have completely shifted in that way, but it had to be done consciously.
Yes.
Right? And the only way that we can shift anything ever is first to become aware of it. if we're not aware of a habit, pattern, or tendency, then there's no possible way that we can change it. The other side is that if we don't become aware and really look at it and go, oh God, this has really tied me up. I've compromised myself, right? Or we can watch how we can manipulate people. There's so many different things that go into this. But we have to become aware of something before we can consciously shift it, right? Because there's a huge difference between subconscious, which is reactionary, because that's the programming. The subconscious doesn't distinguish between what is real and imagined, and it starts in the womb. It's like a sponge. It just takes everything in unless we consciously allow or disallow it. And so all of this stuff, and this is what we could call conditioning with programming, and it's not about blame, it's not about any of that. It's just how it works. And so when we get triggered, it's the subconscious that is reacting. Whereas the conscious, we can make a conscious response and choose consciously and create something different from that space.
Love it. This is so great. You're completely tapping into something I was thinking about also right before we got together here, and as I was kind of getting ready and thinking about some things and just letting some ideas sort of percolate. And one of the things that came to me is how difficult it has been for I'll speak for myself, for me personally, and then also I know many people I've been working with in recent months where they're noticing they're more activated or triggered with people. And it's funny because when we talk about the subconscious and the unconscious and all these different like hidden parts or beneath the surface, spaces within us and mind and all of that, one of the ways we can become aware and more conscious is to see what's showing up outside of us through the interactions with others and our relationships, right? It's just one beautiful way to have that mirrored to us. But if we're really having a hard time and feeling sort of overwhelmed with the humans, all the people at the moment, it's challenging to have patience to discern those mirrors, those reflections. Mm-hmm. And so something that's been really prevalent, and I know you absolutely relate to this as well in your way, is allowing those reflections to come through nature when people are just a little much for us in the moment. I'm an introvert, so I love, I'm very extroverted in my work and business, right? But at home, like in my actual day-to-day, if I could write and do nothing else, that's my love, my joy. But nature is something that if I'm feeling just a little too vulnerable to go out into the world, to work through some of these things that are happening, I can go to the woods, I can go to the mountains, I can go to the water. And even though it still can be extremely vulnerable in those spaces too, there's a difference in the reflection. It's more pure, it's more uninhibited. It's like you had mentioned, the manipulations and the things that we can do, even though all of that serves a purpose, it's not the same when those reflections come through nature. It just seems to be, not that there isn't some trickster energy around that too, because we're still responding and seeing it. But I feel like that's another gateway for people to get in touch with what we're talking about here and really understanding that we don't only have to learn our lessons through others. We can go to the natural world to see what's going on and to reveal our own shadows and our own growth and opportunities. I recently had this crazy experience. I wrote about it a couple months ago. I still laugh when I think about it, but I had to choose a topic for a paper, and it was a very serious paper. And I was just not into it. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm not feeling it. Like a little kid all of a sudden. I just felt like a 6-year-old rebelling, being like, I don't want to write my paper. And my intuition, my higher self, my soul was like, get outside, just get outside. So I'm like, all little kid-like and still resistant and kind of dragging my feet. And I dragged my little journal and pen into the woods. And sitting there, just kind of breathing and taking it all in. And out of nowhere, I'm pulled to look into the distance to the left. And I immediately felt a fear response in my body. My whole body went into a little bit of fight or flight. And what I thought I saw, I didn't see this, but what I thought I saw was a wolf in the woods. Didn't have enough time for my mind to say, that's not really the area they would be hanging out, or, none of those logical things had space to drop in. It was just immediate reaction. And instead of running, which is a part of me wanted to run, I breathe and I turn my awareness, my attention back to the spot where I thought I saw what I saw. And what actually started to then become clear is it was the way the leaves and the shadows and the tree all together were playing in this way to reveal this shape. And when I sat with that, I got the lesson. And for me in that moment, it was, these are the illusions. These are the things that if you are not giving yourself the time, the space, the presence, the patience to acknowledge, you're going to run. You're not going to learn. We're going to have to keep showing you these things in different ways. And so nature in that way became a moment of understanding and awareness. Whereas if that same intensity of a lesson would have come through a person that day, I might have likely been too pissy to acknowledge it, too annoyed, just wasn't feeling it. But I got it through nature that way. So I just feel like that's helpful maybe for people who are trying to navigate these messes and figure these things out, and the beauty and the grace of it all too. And, taking that time to say, what is another way I can work on like you mentioned, bringing awareness, things to consciousness. And that's one of my favorite ways is studying the natural world, looking deeply into it, seeing beyond what I think is there into what's behind all of that. And can I keep looking further into it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's just, obviously, a big part of my work is with nature, with plants, spirits, energies. Obviously, living in Peru, this land is magical, and connecting to nature is so important. A lot of, nature and the environment isn't separate from us. We're a part of it. We're very much a part of it. And it can show us if we can pay attention, right? Or we have those moments when something sort of catches our eye and we're drawn to it and we go, oh, that just sort of answered that question for me, or that cleared that up, or it's like you said, it's showing me and teaching me something. And it's much easier sometimes to receive that from nature. It knows what it's doing, right? There's an intelligence there. There's an intelligence in every single thing. To tune into it, there has to be a willingness and to go to it. But nature is calming. Water, everything in nature can teach us something at any given moment. And yeah, oftentimes, the way that we've mostly all grown up and evolved is that when somebody else tries to tell you something, it's like, no. Right?
Yeah, I can't hear this today.
Don't you dare try to tell me what to do, what to think, or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's the case all the time. I mean, I think you and I are both fairly open to looking and receiving. And a lot of times we might not like what we hear or what's being reflected. But then I ask myself, okay, if I'm having a moment like that, then it's not the other person. It's I got to look here. Pema Chodron, one of the things that she said that I remember a lot of is that other people will show you where you're stuck, not the other way around.
I love that.
And so, and that takes a certain willingness as well. You have to surrender into that, right? And, we're all on different places on our path of realization, awakening. And I'm not saying, I'm not belittling anybody. It's just the way it is. You know, I mean, I used to be one of those highly triggered people. I was carrying so much baggage around with me that I refused to look at for so long that it was like, nope, 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 nope. I mean, I can remember my partner of, 16 years at the time. She's like, Carm, you got a lot of stuff. There's the childhood trauma. There's this, there's that, there's the other thing. You want to go and talk to somebody? I'm like, nope. Nope, I don't. Nope, I don't. Don't want to go talk to somebody because all they're going to do is make me talk about it all over again. And I've already lived it once. Why the hell would I want to do it again? But hey, guess what? You kind of have to look at it. And you need to look at it. And for me, it was about coming to a place of acceptance. Mm. And it wasn't about blame anymore. It wasn't about blame. It wasn't about shame. I mean, I blamed myself. I grew up in a household where, my mother was tormented, troubled that she had done that internally, and she took it out on everyone else around her. And so I got the unworthy, you're useless, you're never going to amount to anything. And then I started to tell myself that. Right. And so then I would sabotage myself and I didn't want to look at any of it. It was just too painful. And before I came down to Peru the first time to sit with ayahuasca, I had met a healer in Vancouver who absolutely was the impetus to changing my entire life. I was absolutely miserable. My relationship was over. I was doing this crazy ass job at the time. And I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable. And I mean, I had multiple thoughts of suicide my whole entire life. And I knew that something needed to change in that moment. I knew that it was either going to be the end or the beginning. Mm. And I stumbled upon or was guided to this woman. And I had a couple of sessions with her. And the experiential change within me, I was like a completely different person in a week. And then I went and saw her again, and it was like a completely different person again. And I had had enough experiences as a child, being very empathic, very intuitive. I would pick up on spirit all the time. So I got it. I understood. Spirit didn't scare me. I started to see spirit 6 months before Shannon and I split up. And it didn't bother me. I got it. But I buried it under the carpet because I didn't know what to do with it. But this experience that I had with this healer was so deep and so profound that I had to know how. I said, I get it, but how? And I dove in. I dove in 24/7. Did the reading, the courses, what we all do in the beginning of this. And 9 months later, I find myself down in the Amazon drinking ayahuasca, and that blew my mind, literally. It allowed me to grieve what I had experienced throughout my childhood, and then what I had done to myself subsequent to that. And to shift and start changing the perception and understanding the connection that we have to everything that is around us, and then start to reconnect inward and reinvent and recreate this identity and personality that once thought that it was worthless and wasn't going to amount to anything. And I look now at all of those experiences as absolute blessings, because if I hadn't had them, I'm not sitting here having this conversation with you. I'm not working with the people that I'm working with. And I don't have that connection to different dimensions of consciousness where I know that I can create my life the way I want it to. Now, I still get in my own way sometimes. I mean, I'm still in a body, so obviously I've still got stuff to do, right? But it's just so complex.
That's amazing. That's incredible. There's so much richness in what you just shared. And what keeps coming to me are these these experiences of life that involve the death and the rebirth in different forms. And I feel like part of our struggles within that, not just the obvious going through a trial, a tribulation, a challenge, turbulent moments in life, we don't necessarily all have rituals or ceremony to sort of mark these moments, you know, like rites of passage. Whereas in other experiences and different cultures, there's so much respect given to things, including the grieving process. There's so many of us walking around holding sadness, not knowing how to identify that because we are not even in touch with the body that's trying to give us the language of that sadness and emotion and say, here's what you're holding. When have you given yourself permission to just pause and be with this? And for some, including myself, that was terrifying. The idea of sadness, we have you and I have very parallel experiences of childhood. And so sadness for me would trigger because it would bring me back to one of my ancestors who struggled with bipolar disorder. And so there was a lot of depression, a lot of sleeping on the couch for 3 or 4 days at a time, a lot of, you know, not being able to care for self or for the others of the household. And so there was a very intense aversion to sadness within me, because the minute I would feel just a little low or a little down, fear would become triggered of, here we go. Now this is going to happen to me. I'm going to end up like that. And so I never gave myself permission to feel into those places that you're speaking to. And I think that's such a beautiful way to honor that and to show like that is just as important as the light, as the growth, as the power, the grief, the anger, the sadness, the pain. Of course, we don't want to live in those experiences, but it's so important to honor them in different ways. And it's just so incredible that you followed your knowings to end up where you were, to finally give the space for that to happen. I believe in that wholeheartedly. It's amazing. We become a different person because something new is born from us through the grieving of what wasn't, you know, what we weren't given, who couldn't love us enough, how we might have talked to ourselves or treated ourselves, or you know, whatever that might look like on our individual journeys. And it's so important to give ourselves that gift of, it's strange to call it a gift, but it is time to breathe, to honor, right? It's interesting, but I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I felt that really deeply while you were sharing that.
Yeah, you know, it's such an interesting process because you don't, you know, I was sad a lot, right? I was just sad, and I was afraid. I was afraid. I had to tiptoe around on eggshells around my mother because I never knew what was going to happen. So I learned to just kind of keep my head down and keep my mouth shut, which was kind of a pro and con because for me to learn how to express myself later in life was very, very difficult for me. I would also often do it, anger and frustration would come out, right? And so the good part about it was being as empathic as I was, is that I became an observer at a very, very young age. And I would be able to sit in a room and observe. Now, I didn't understand the energy that I was feeling because I was young. I had no one else to talk to about it. But I would pick up things and I thought, oh my God, I would feel sick. I would feel that in the pit of my stomach. And I didn't distinguish whether or not it was mine or somebody else's. And so I just thought I was just this neurotic mess. But what I later learned and understood was that I was actually learning and kind of training from a young age to sit, because when you sit and just observe, you can pick up and perceive a lot of things that are unsaid, that are beneath the layers. And it was a little bit problematic for me as well, because I could sit in a room and hear and watch somebody say something, but know that they actually meant the entire opposite. And then I would go into judgment because I'm like, why are you lying? Why are you making up this story? And so it took me a long time, even at the beginning of this journey, to step out of the judgment and just accept it for what it was. Mm. And then going back and looking at the grief and allowing yourself to grieve. Once you give yourself permission to just go in there and get messy and cry and stomp your feet, then you come from a different place and you can kind of just accept it. You've leaned into that pointy end of the stick and you can just go, okay, I can accept this now. I can hold it. I can hold this. I'm strong enough now to hold this and not get into the triggers, not get into the blame, not get into the judgment, and not get into the shame and the guilt of it, and to just hold it. So it's tricky because I feel that we have to be careful not to attach to the grief.
Right.
Right? Because as soon as we start to attach to the grief, then we're not able to hold it and do what we all like to call and release. The release really is to be able to just focus your attention on something else. That's the release, for me, in my experience anyway.
I love that. That's so good. It's true. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier when you brought up the masks, right? It's so grief can be the same thing in, like, let's call it maybe the shadow aspect of that grief, and could be over identifying with that pain maybe, or the story or whatever that emotion brings up for us. Because for some of us, grief is the tremendous loss maybe associated with a person, a role, identity, a relationship, a lot of the things you mentioned actually. And if we over-identify with that, we might want to actually keep that grief in the experience because it gives life to something, even though this might be a little graphic, but this is where it comes back to nature. What we're actually holding on to is decaying. And
right.
and our bodies and our souls and nature try to show us to let that go. But yet, and that's why I feel like that holding, the way you're expressing that, is so beautiful, because it's allowing that process of the breakdown, the things to break down, to move through, and not holding on to it and trying to continue to breathe life into something that's just meant to leave. And I think that's so tricky. That's so tricky for many of us. And I like that, how you say to focus, to direct attention for your process of release. That really resonates for me as well. I recently just had a very profound experience after moving here. We've only been here a little over 4 months. We moved from Arizona to New York, and it's familiar territory. It wasn't a move that was to somewhere unknown. I had grown up about an hour and a half from where we are now, but complete shift of nature from the desert to the woods. And even though on the outside, everything was beautiful, it's what I wanted. I just felt this sense of peace in my heart that I hadn't felt in a really long time. Another part of me was going through a death, and I was holding on. I didn't want to let go of my life in Arizona. I didn't want to let go of some of the things I had created that were only meant to serve me while I was there for like 18 years. And so even though this move on the surface level was gorgeous and amazing and everything I wanted it to be and magical, under the surface, it was extremely painful, and I was trying to hold on. And this moment happened. You'll get a kick out of this. Another nature reference, of course. This moment happened where I was outside getting the mail, and I had just kind of turned and looked, and there's this cute little groundhog guy. He's sitting out there, and he's watching me, and I'm watching him, and no words obviously exchanged, but there was a look, right? And I'm just kind of watching him, and I'm sure he's like, what is this creature up to? What is she doing? And after a moment or so, I went back inside. Didn't think anything of it. Well, unfortunately, about 3-4 days later, someone had hit him in the road. So a car must have hit him. So he was laying in the road, and there was some sadness over this groundhog. And I kind of laughed at like how almost a part of me felt silly for feeling sad. And another part of me was like, I'm always deeply connected to the natural world and sentient beings and these beautiful creatures in all forms. And at the same time, I started to get angry because there were vultures like flying about and landing on the fence. And I knew it was just a matter of time. And I was feeling very conflicted, even though I understand this is a natural process. A part of me was like, I can't save him. He's already dead, unfortunately. And now it's just going to be disgusting, right? So there are all these thoughts. Few days go by, inevitable happened. Vultures swooped in, do what they do. I'll save the details of that piece. And I watched a part of it. I didn't watch the actual act, but I watched the process over a few days of the clearing of things just being taken away. And it's so interesting because they did this thing, and I caught it on video. There were 4 vultures, 3 of the same kind, and then 1 was a different type of vulture. So there was like, I guess you would call them the traditional vultures and like a turkey vulture. And when that one turkey vulture swooped in, the other 3 did this ritualistic dance. It was so interesting. They're standing and they're swooping and they're spreading their wings and they're going through this whole process. And then I had this awareness of, I had all this anger like directed at these birds, at these creatures for doing what they do. They hadn't actually killed the groundhog. They were there to help clean up the debris, the energetic debris, the physical debris, the leftovers, to stop the spread of germs. Like that is one of their main roles. And when I started to think about that role being that much of a, into the depths, into the shadow, into the underworld type experiences we would talk about like metaphorically and stuff like that, I thought, their role is incredibly special. And it showed me that I was still holding on to these things that I had so-called proclaimed I released, that I let go of. And yet I was holding, and I could feel the sadness and all of these things. And so witnessing the groundhog to the vultures to that entire experience completely helped me shift what I was holding. And interestingly, one day, my whole family saw this, thank goodness, because otherwise sometimes I think people wouldn't believe me. But I did get it on video too. I was sitting at my table, which just happens to point out to the woods, to this little glass door that we have, the front door or whatever. And one of the vultures swooped down onto the railing and sat there. Now, we had already been here for a couple of months. I'd never seen such a thing like that. It didn't quite make sense because there were so many obstacles where it didn't seem like a likely place that this bird would fly into. And we just all stood there staring like, what is going on? Now, mind you, this was before I recognized the importance of the debris and them cleaning and all of that. And anyhow, after just kind of observing for a few moments without disturbing, I finally got my camera and took a little video. And then we opened the door and realized there was actually 2 of them out there, one sitting on the perch and one down below. And then they flew right around the corner, and I watched and I looked around, and there was about 4 or 5 of them over there. And so they were all kind of like congregating in this area. And I had this overwhelming sense. Now the groundhog was gone. All of that was done with. But I had this strange sense that there was almost like a knowing, like, I got it. Thank you for showing me that. I got it. Thank you for literally flying into my backyard and making eye contact to make sure that I got how critical a piece this was, that I let go of this debris. It was that critical. That's how I took this to be. And so that, in one hand, we could call that magical or enchanted, the natural world, giving us signs from nature and all the beautiful things we like to talk about. But honestly, it was disturbing. Sorry, there's a siren going off here now.
It is what it is. There's no cows mooing yet, so something had to happen.
Maybe it's validation, right?
Right.
The messy middle of things, right? It's interesting.
It's all good. Yeah. I love that. It's the decay. And and I'll maybe circle back to that. As much as we try, because we sit here, we can say, "Oh, I want to release this. I'm gonna release it right now." You can't do it with the intellect. You can't do this with the mind. The mental body, it doesn't work that way. It just absolutely doesn't work that way. I've tried it. It doesn't work that way. Right? And so a lot of people, when you feel fear as well and you want to release something, you're like, oh God, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. And we try to push it away. And that's never going to work because it's a part of us. So for me, it's like you have to bring it in and say, okay, come here, come here, come here. Come here, let's do this together. I fear I see you, but we're going to do this together and we're going to do it anyway. Right? And when we can accept that rather than try to push, because we're technically trying to divorce a part of ourselves from ourselves, and that's never going to work. Right? And watching the decay, right? And acknowledging that there's an aspect of that is fertilizer. Right? I lived in a rainforest for 38 years. I grieved it when I left, and I knew I would. So I started grieving it before I left. I would go and talk to the cedars, the firs, the bald eagles, the ravens, and say, I'm going to miss you, but I'm taking you with me. I know I am. I know I am. I know I am. And I would walk through the forest in BC, and I'd be crying before I left because I knew I was leaving. And I thought I had it done, and it was okay. And then I got here, and it was even 4 months ago or something. It was like I saw somebody post a video of like Spanish banks and the trees and the eagles, and I just cried because I was like, oh, I do miss it. I do miss it more than I thought I did. I was trying to push it away in this way, so I just allowed that to happen. Even here, but in the rainforest, because a lot of the trees and the stumps, the nursing trees. It looks like the tree is dead. It's fallen over. Oh, that tree, its life is over. But then all of a sudden, there's this other little sprout that's growing up out of it, fertilizing new life, right? And so it's like, the groundhog, there was decay, but it fed the vultures. It's the cycle. And there's death is an illusion. We've been taught to fear death. Death is an illusion. I remind myself every day that I am mortal and this body is going to go back to the earth one day. Right? There's only life and life and life and life, different dimensions. So 3D life is going to be over one day. But that doesn't mean life and the awareness and the consciousness and life that we are. The essence of that is always. It's always, always, always. And so, we go back to that 3D perception of, oh my God, this is me. I go out of my way as much as possible to never refer to this as me because it's not me. It's mine. Yeah. This is my body. This is my mind. We've gathered this as a heap of food and a heap of impressions. And what we gather can be ours, but it can never be us. So I will refer to this as myself, which is true. My human, because that's my kind of fun way of saying, hey, my human doesn't like bitter things and, whatever. But yeah, that decay, it's ongoing. It can happen little moments. There can be decay and these little deaths in little moments, just becoming aware of, oh my God, I put my left shoe on all the time. I'm going to put my right shoe on today and first instead of my left shoe. And that may seem silly to some people, but it's just becoming aware of how much we get into this autopilot, right? And it's sometimes it's the little deaths that we're willing to experience that can amount to the big ones, and to show us in so many ways how we have really kept ourselves captive.
Yes. There's a favorite quote of mine. I don't know who said it. I'll have to look it up, but it's something like, small hinges swing big doors.
Nice.
It's the small actions you're speaking to, right? Lead to really big monumental change.
Yeah. I mean, it's all a dream. We only exist through the capacity really of our mind. This is all holographic. Nature, science has proven this, right? Under microscopes and watching matter, as we would call it, we're technically reappearing and disappearing 20 million times per second, right? So everything is really holographic. We're dreaming right now. And so if I'm dreaming this reality right now, and we all know how powerful we are when we go into the negative thought loop and what we manifest through that. Because when we put our attention on the negativity and everything that is wrong and we don't want this, we get more of it because that's where we're putting our attention. The universe doesn't distinguish. It doesn't distinguish the cosmos, the intelligent universe, doesn't distinguish between, oh, she doesn't want that. It's just that's where the energy is going. So, okay, we'll give that back. It's Shiva Shakti principle, right? I mean, it's just how it works. And when you can understand that and really come to go and go, oh, wow, look at what I've created. Look at all of the mess I've created out of fear, out of habit, out of the subconscious, out of the unconscious. And when you can recognize that and you have that moment of clarity, and like, well, wait a minute. If I was powerful enough to create that mess, then I too can consciously create what I do want. Right? And I think, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think that really at the root of it, even through my shamanic practice, through everything else, and I think that you're on that same thing. This is what we're trying to do, not only for ourselves, but through our own experiences, be able to share with the people that we work with. That we can create consciously our reality and our life. And there's no taboos. A lot of people have this thing about money being bad and, oh, it's greedy and this and that and the other thing. And that's an illusion. That's all the lens. That's all the perception from habit, pattern, tendency, maybe what we've been taught. We get into religious beliefs, political beliefs. They're all cultivated the same way. But we can do and shift things if we do it consciously and come to an understanding that we are so much more powerful and so much more than we think we are.
Absolutely. And more than the masks, more than these different pieces of mind that we, the thoughts that arise and the beliefs we hold and the roles that we have, all of these beautiful things that we've been speaking to is just barely the surface of what we're even aware of. There's so much depth to us and to this universe and to the hidden realms of all things. And I feel like it's just so interesting to think about, something that comes to mind that I think is important to share on this is awe, the word awe, A-W-E, and wonder. I talk about that a lot too. One of my favorite things about this universe is the ability to have on one hand, the knowing, like I'm co-creating this reality. I'm contributing to my life experience and shaping it and working with it and learning and unveiling and unlearning at the same time. And the sense of awe and wonder, when I'm willing and allowing, I'll never know it all. And I'll never experience everything. And there's something beautiful about that. It used to be frustrating to me. Like I just wanted to know it all to feel safe, to fit everything into a box. So it all made sense. And now when something surprises me, like just even an awareness and insight, just like the experience with the vultures and the nature and the shadowy wolf figure, all of these different things, I'm extremely grateful to be open-minded enough, because I know I have a lot of work around that piece of it still, but open-minded enough to always allow myself to experience wonder and awe. And that is something that I am really grateful for, because it inspires me, it reconnects me, it reminds me there's so much more than what we know and what we can see and sense and feel. And synchronicity is another experience of that. And just watching all the things line up and connect, and things that just don't make sense and not trying to make sense of them. There's just this little area of wonder that I think is so beautiful. And I think that's important also as we're talking about shifting patterns and living consciously. And, you know, for people who are really trying to figure this all out and navigate and learn their way, synchronicity is one of those things that reminds me that I'm on the right path. I'm doing, not that we can get it wrong. I don't believe in that necessarily either, but I'm in a more aligned way, I guess I could say, for where I'm at. And I had this experience moving here and then recently worrying about one of my loved ones being able to integrate with all the changes that had happened in our lives. And I kept just going, man, I don't know what to do for this person. I don't know how to help them. I don't know how to make it better, you know. And it's interesting. I'll just share this little story because it's so important. I received a message via one of my social media channels from a friend. And she was like, you guys moved to New York, right? And we were going back and forth. And we had moved the same time. But keep this in mind. This is so amazing. Her and her family moved to Arizona, to Sedona, Arizona, where I lived. And that's where we met. And then her family moved north into Flagstaff. And then we moved north into Flagstaff for years. We were around each other. Then we left to go from Arizona to New York. She left to go from Arizona to Alabama. And then she just messaged me and said, I just got reassigned to upstate New York. I'm going to be in this area. Is this anywhere near you guys? And I looked it up. It is less than 10 minutes away. And then when she gave me the final address that she's going to, it was 4 minutes away. And she has a son who's friends with my son. And this move of them now being close is now helping my loved one integrate. So it was almost like a unanswered prayer, but again, a synchronistic thing. But it was also the universe's way of being like, listen, you can't control everything, right? Like, it's not for you to control everything. But if you remain open, we'll help you out. We'll help you out. And I really believe that. So I thought that was fun to share.
That's amazing. You know, there's no such thing as coincidences. We may not ever know the reason why, and the mind can't even grasp, you know, a large part of this. And, you know, I stopped trying. I used to try to find meaning in everything. And I'm like, there is actually, sometimes there's messages, but at the end of the day, the insanity of all of this, it's insane. It's chaos, right? So if we're insane anyway, why don't we just be it joyfully?
Right.
Right. I mean, let's just play. Let's just play. You know, I've been, you know, I would call myself, you know, being guilty of being too serious for a large portion of this journey, because I looked at it as being so sacred, and it because it was so new to me. And I stopped one day and I'm like, Carmela, you've got a really good sense of humor. Like, let's play. You know, let's play. Let's bring that, you know, the divine feminine back into. There's nothing. Everything is a play of Shakti. Everything, every single thing, and you know, to just start really sort of being aware and including everything as a part of yourself, everything and everyone, because either everything is sacred or everything is nonsense. Pick one. You can't pick both. You have to pick one. Either everything is nonsense or everything is sacred. But as soon as you say, oh, I like this, I don't like that, this is sacred, that isn't, is the biggest entanglement. Our likes and our dislikes. It's like, can we get to a place of just accepting everything equally? You know, equanimously. I think I got it right. I get twisted around with that one a lot. But my guru talks about this a lot. It's about inclusivity. Can you be a mother to the world? Everything is yours. Everything. Everything and everyone belongs to you. The same, and everything is equally as sacred. there's nothing that is more beautiful than another. And it was interesting. And I think he was talking about this the other day, and I can't remember what yogi had said it, but he was upset with someone that went with him to watch a sunset, and they were there in absolute silence. And this other person said, "Oh, isn't the sunset beautiful?" And the yogi looked at him in disgust and just walked away. And he said, "How dare he say the sunset is beautiful?" The underlying meaning or concept, I guess, was that if somewhere within you, you have an idea that something is beautiful, then somewhere within you, you also have somewhere within you that you think something is ugly. Mm. Whether you're recognizing it or not. And I thought of that this morning. I do a pretty serious sadhana protocol in the morning, and there's a new mama cow and baby just over the fence from me that I can see from here. And the baby was feeding, and I was reminded of that. And I thought, yeah, how is that any less beautiful than a sunset or a sunrise? Right. So, it's shifting perceptions always. It's not always easy, I like this one, I don't like that one, and trying to navigate through that space. And just trying to remember for me as much as I possibly can from moment to moment, what am I creating now? What am I creating now? Because with every thought, there's an energy. And I spent so much time in my previous iteration of this creating a lot of negative thoughts. And then that negativity would come back and I'd wonder why. And then I would self-blame saying, oh, it's because I'm not worthy. And then I got to the point of understanding that, oh, wait a minute, I was creating this. So I ask myself, and a lot of the times when I'm working with people, I'll ask themselves to just check in, as much as you possibly can. What am I creating right now? What am I creating right now? What am I creating right now? And do it consciously. Because if you're in the negative loop, it's really, oh, okay, well, what am I creating? Oh, shit, right. Yeah, okay. Let's shift focus, shift attention. Okay, that's what I want. That's what I want to create. That's what I want to create. And let's do that as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how quick we can get pulled into that loop. So that practice. So many loops.
There's so many loops. There's so many layers. It's, and I think that the trick is that when we find ourselves in that space of fear or worry or doubt, is to not judge the self for it, to come to a place of just accepting and understanding that it's taken this long to build this, that it's going to take a long time for, in some cases, it's going to take a bit of work to unwind it. It's wash, rinse, repeat to get here, wash, rinse, repeat to get out of it. So if we can just be kind and gentle with each other and just give ourselves permission to go, yeah, look at the insanity of it all. I'm not going to judge myself for it. Let's come at this from a playful kind of place. And let's just start creating. Let's just, we've got the desire. Let's have the willingness, the courage. And let's go and let's now create something that we want to, playfully, joyfully, lovingly, consciously, and go from that space. But we're nearing the end of our time. I don't want to keep you too long. So on that note, a couple of things, if you can, let's let people know, and I'll put this in the show notes as well, where they can reach you, melissacorter.com, correct?
melissacorter.com, that's correct.
Okay, awesome. And maybe if you could just have a quick share, what are you working on creating right now?
Oh, so much going on. So to consolidate, I'll say I have a new program I started. It's still in beta test mode, so we're discerning if we want to do this one-on-one or in group, but it's called Weaving the Dream, and it's helping people to start creating new rituals in their lives, new ways of working in life to bring in that idea of enchantment. into life or business. So it's sort of like you can choose one path or the other. And I'm loving that because it's the simple movements. It's like you mentioned, those small steps, right, that we can do to create bigger change. So that's one of the things. And so same thing, you can go to my website, melissacorter.com, or you can email our office, which is info@melissacorter.com for info. Other than that, just a lot of teaching, speaking, interviews, all of these kind of things. And then we do have a monthly membership as well. It's going through a rebrand because I went through a rebirth. So that will be happening. But that is going to be a beautiful place for people to come together in a very similar format for working life, business, but with this idea of enchantment. A lot of depth psychology type of perspective, Jungian, which is a lot of the ego, shadow, archetypes, energy, consciousness, all of that. And other than that, just writing and enjoying the season of fall. So that's everything in a nutshell. But yeah, would love to connect if anybody feels guided to reach out.
Absolutely. Melissa, thank you so much. It has been, I can't believe it's like been, I think it's like just over an hour. Like that is crazy. Hour and 10 minutes. Oh my God. We could have kept going, I'm sure.
Easily.
Melissa, thank you so much. It's been a joy and a pleasure. And thank you so much for being here. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody, to Creating Life Consciously. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Take care.